We are back into the swing of our regularly scheduled programming. If you showed up at 10 today, you were either really late or you were really early. We are back into it. School's getting ready to start. Teachers, we do have gifts for you. Stop by the table out those doors. At the end of service, we're going to have our ushers at the back of the sanctuary for our tithes and offerings. If you filled out that card, you can actually drop it in that basket or in the boxes in the back. I don't know about you guys, but Kelly and I have been talking a lot about the fact that it just feels like, I don't want to over spiritualize this, but it feels like the earth is groaning. You know what I'm talking about? Like Revelation talks about this, the Bible addresses this, but I'm not saying, hey, we're in the end times, but I'm also not saying that. Okay. We're seeing fires, we're seeing earthquakes. By the way, we checked on the folks in Colombia. Some of them were shaken up a little bit, but no major issues in the areas that we minister to in Colombia. But man, the place where the kind of the epicenter of that earthquake was just devastating. I'm sure you saw pictures of it. We've got hurricanes in Hawaii and just all kinds of stuff happening. And it's a heaviness, really. And again, we know that God's in control. We trust him. We put our full trust in him, but it just feels heavy, doesn't it? Well, today's message is also going to be pretty heavy. And my timing on this is not great because last week we had Move Up Sunday. And so the first Sunday, our seventh graders are in the sanctuary with us. Happened to be the day that we're going to be talking about 2 Samuel chapter 11, story of David and Bathsheba. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning. If you are a parent who has your kids in here and they are under 12, I would highly suggest you take advantage of our kids department. Otherwise, you may be having some conversations on the way home that you didn't know you were going to have. And I don't want to force these conversations, of course, because as a parent, nobody wants to be told when to have conversations about certain things. If you have a kid who is 12 or 13 years old and they're getting ready to go into school, if you haven't had this conversation yet, now's a good time for you to begin having those conversations. We're going to be talking about sexual sin. We're going to be talking about abuse of power. We're going to sprinkle some murder in there. And it's going to be heavy. And if you're visiting with us today, welcome to Lifehouse. And the messages aren't always this heavy. I just pushed this one this week so I could do it twice and see what would happen. First service handled it okay. But I'm going to pray. And if you have a kid in here, this is going to be a little bit more in the PG-13 range. If you would like to check your child into Kids Church, our teachers are aware and they will gladly accept them. So I'm going to pray for our world, but also for our service as well. Lord, as we just got done singing, we surrender to you. Put our whole life in your hands. And Lord, for all of the places in our world that just seem to be experiencing so much destruction and so much disaster, Lord, my prayer is that out of those ashes would come new life. That for my friends in the Northwest, whose people in their churches are being affected by the fires, and for my friends in Hawaii who are enduring the brunt of a hurricane and flooding, for the people in Indiana, 5 people killed in the flooding in Indiana, Lord, there's just so much going on in our world today and so much heaviness. And Lord, I pray that as believers, as followers of you, that we would be light in the midst of that. That we would be a place of rest, that we would be people of peace in the midst of chaos. Lord, for our service today, I pray that our hearts would be open for this message. Lord, that we would not hear condemnation or shame, but Lord, that we would hear just your grace upon us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 11. I'm going to read through the chapter in its entirety, and then we're going to unpack this. Starting in verse 1, it says, "In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, it's raining outside, flowers are blooming, it's time to go kill some people. David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed, walked around on the roof of the palace, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, 'She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite.' Then David sent messengers to get her." The Hebrew word for that is to literally go and take her. "She came to him, and he slept with her. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, 'I am pregnant.' So David sent this word to Joab, 'Send me Uriah the Hittite,' which is her husband, of course, and Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, 'Go down to your house and wash your feet.'" So David sends for Uriah. He comes, he's small talk, right? He's all chatting him up. "How's things going on the front? Like, how are you doing? Hey, why don't you take some time, go take a shower and sleep with your wife?" Thinking then that he would think the baby was his. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. And David was told, Uriah didn't go home. So now he's like, well, now what do I do? So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Like, what's your problem? Like, go see your wife. Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." He's so loyal. Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David got him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. Maybe it was because he couldn't get home, or maybe it was because he was still remaining loyal. I think that. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah out in the front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out, fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbesheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" So let me just translate that for you. Joab knew that what he did would have been considered one of the most ridiculous, stupid military moves in the world. Right? He knew that it would be a mistake, No experienced general would have ever made that mistake. And so here's his fear. He's afraid that David is going to hear about it. He's going to forget that that's what he ordered him to do, and he's going to blame Joab for his carelessness. He's like, this isn't on me. This is on you. And so Joab says, when David hears what happened, just emphasize the fact that Uriah died too, and then he's going to have to remember, oh yeah, this is on me. Verse 22, the messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, the men overpowered us, came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. David told the messenger, say this to Joab. This messenger back and forth. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. When Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. So now everyone assumes that she just got pregnant on their honeymoon, and they lived happily ever after. No. But then, chapter 11 ends with these haunting words. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So, spring hits, kings led their armies to war, and David doesn't go. He sent Joab and the troops. This is a great name for a band if you're thinking of starting one. He sends them out. He stays behind in Jerusalem. And then one day, restless, he wanders the rooftop. He spots a woman below, Bathsheba, wife of Uriah the Hittite, and this is one of his elite soldiers. He sent for her, slept with her, sent her home. Finally, she sends word she's pregnant, and so he is trying to figure out how he's going to cover up his sin. Can't get this guy to sleep with his wife while he's on furlough. Ends up having him killed, all in order to cover up his sin. I want us to let this sink in. I think this is a familiar story for people who have been around the church for very long. But I just want to let it sink in that this is David. We've been in the life of David. This is David, the man after God's own heart. This is David, the hoped for, the long anticipated king of Israel. This is David, the giant slayer. Right? This is David, the sweet shepherd of God's people. He was the author of so many of the Psalms. This is David who had refused so many times to take matters into his own hands. David, to whom God makes all of the promises in 2 Samuel chapter 7. David, who spoke beautifully of integrity and worship. It turns out that if we were to fast forward into 2 Samuel chapter 23, that Uriah the Hittite was actually one of David's mighty men, which means that he was a part of an elite group of 37 fighters, which means while David was an outcast and he was fleeing for his life and he was running from Saul and he was hiding in the wilderness, this guy would have been a part of those guys that were with him, and they believed in him and they stood by him. And now, David not only steals his wife, but he has him murdered. It wouldn't have just been him that was murdered. There were many of the men, because of this decision, that were killed, all to cover up sin. There are some things I think that we can learn here about sexual sin. Some things that we can learn about abuse of power. But more importantly, what this passage is going to answer is a deeper question. Why does every human leader end up disappointing us? Maybe not this badly, but they all do to some degree. So a couple things we're going to look at. We're going to look at David at his worst. We're going to identify 5 different lessons learned from his sin. And then the second thing is, why do we desire a righteous king, a righteous leader? So the first lesson that we can learn from his sin is that he got lazy. He was lazy. Kings went to war in spring. David sent someone else in his place and stayed home. This wasn't a scheduling conflict, right? This wasn't like, oh, I've got something else. I'm going to have to send you there. I'll go here. No, this was him being lazy. This is a man who is drifting away from the calling and the responsibility that had defined him. There's a pattern here worth noticing, that people are most vulnerable to temptation, not when life is the hardest, but when they've quietly checked out of their role, quietly checked out of their work or the responsibility that they were built for. You can kind of envision, it's like when we had all of this rain back behind our house, kind of on Bulverde Road on the way to Bulverde, the town, there's this big dip that goes, the road kind of dips down, and then if you look to the left, there's this creek. And 90% of the time, probably 95% of the time, it's clear, it's dry, it's not a big deal. But when we got all this rain, water went where water wanted to go. It was going everywhere, and not within the banks. It was outside of the banks that were there to contain it. When you think about people stepping outside of their calling, out of their gifting, this is a soldier who stops soldiering, a parent who stops parenting, or an employee who's just mentally checked out with the job that they used to care about. The drive and the energy that used to have a healthy outlet doesn't just vanish. It doesn't just go away. What happens is it goes looking for a substitute. It goes outside the banks. David wasn't a man with too much passion. He was a man whose passion had nowhere productive left to go. He was bored. Everything that I'm about to say to you applies to both genders. I just want us to hear this. This applies to both genders, but I do want to talk to the men specifically. And this isn't one of those services where I'm going to try to beat you over the head. I just want to acknowledge that men tend to struggle in this area. I'm not saying that women don't, but men especially do. That it's when you've disengaged from your role as a spiritual leader in your family or in your community that the allure and excitement of sex promises fulfillment, a distraction, and something that we desperately crave. Men, we were created to lead, to fight. We were created to serve and to protect. And when we're not doing that, that's when those God-given energies begin to look for a different outlet. They begin to get outside the banks. And quite often that outlet is the intoxication of illicit sex. So here's a pro tip. That temptation, it loses its power. It doesn't lose all of its power, but it loses a lot of its power when we are actively engaged in the spiritual leadership of our family. And whatever place God has given us to lead in, that we are engaging in the spiritual leadership, whether that's if you don't have like a immediate family in your community, in your church, when you are actively engaged in the battle, you won't be as susceptible to those cravings. I'm not saying temptation goes away completely, but it loses a lot of its power. I heard a pastor say that if you don't believe that, try this. Try pulling your pants down in a rugby match. Oh, that's a bad illustration. I just met somebody from Australia. They understand this illustration. You don't have, well, except for it's Australian rules football, not rugby. My bad. You don't have time to think about anything. You have people coming at you from every direction. You have too much to focus on to think about that. I'm just going to tell you, First Service really enjoyed that illustration, and I got nothing out of you guys. I don't know, like you guys just offended by that or what, but for most men, the problem isn't a lustful body, it's an empty soul. It's not that you have uncontrollable lust, it's that you haven't stepped into your leadership calling that God has for you. I'll never forget a pastor telling me when I was early on in the ministry, as a warning, he said, your greatest point of temptation will be Sunday afternoon. Which I thought was odd at the time of hearing it. I understand it now, but many of you would be like, that's weird. Like you just preaching a message and you're engaged in church and worship and stuff. Yeah, all of that's true, except for there's this huge adrenaline that happens on a Sunday morning for pastors when they have to stand up in front of people and they have to preach. And then all of a sudden service is over and they have all of this adrenaline. And all they want to do is have an adrenaline crash and go take a nap or go numb out or disengage spiritually. And his recommendation to me was anytime after a Sunday morning you feel amped up, go for a run, go exercise, go lift some weights, go do something to deal with the adrenaline in your body. There's something about this that changes. Like when it's not that we can't handle temptation. It's that we have to acknowledge and recognize that at the end of a message, the enemy's going to start going after your insecurities. That was a terrible thing to say. You shouldn't have used the rugby illustration. Like all of these things. And you just want to numb out and disconnect. The second thing that we learned was that he lingered. David didn't stumble into this. He was on the roof. He saw her. And instead of turning away, going back downstairs, he allowed himself to be captivated. So he sent someone to find out who she was. And it didn't stop there. He just kept going, took the next step, the next step, the next step. Sin rarely arrives all at once. It's a series of small, seemingly reasonable choices, each one of them making the next easier to justify. If you've been around Lifehouse for very long, you've probably heard me make the statement that I do my best to try to live my life as though I'm one decision away from being the pastor on the news or on the front page of a newspaper who has fallen. It's not that I think that I'm going to wake up one morning and say, you know what, I'm going to have an affair, or I'm going to embezzle $200,000, or any of those things. Nobody makes that decision. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to commit adultery today. But it's a series of decisions. It's one decision after another decision. It's drinks with a person from work. It's meeting up with a coworker on a business trip because it's the only person you know. It's a private text conversation. It's not that big of a deal. It's kind of like, maybe this illustration will land a little bit better than rugby, but you remember the first time you ever went to go down a water slide and you have to walk up the steps. You got the wooden ladder or steps to get up to the top. It's like you do that and you stand at the top of the water slide and you're telling yourself, I'm just going to check it out. I'm just going to see what happens. And so you sit down and you're like, interesting. Look at the water slide. That looks fun. Nobody who wants to stay dry climbs a ladder, walks to the edge, and sits down at the top. Somewhere along the line, you've already made the decision that you're going down that water slide. It's why the wisest response to temptation usually isn't, let's just try harder to resist. Let's white knuckle this thing. The wisest response is, don't climb the ladder. Once desire has taken a hold of your life fully, willpower alone is a weak defense. Even people of extraordinary moral courage have admitted as much about themselves. That the more dependable strategy is avoidance. It's structuring your life and your relationships and your accountability so you are simply not standing at the top of the slide to begin with. In other words, it's easier to avoid temptation than it is to resist it. If you're like me, you grew up in your childhood getting a lot of your life lessons from the movie Karate Kid. And in that movie, Mr. Miyagi says the best way to avoid a punch is to stay out of the places where you're likely to get into a fight. Or maybe that's not where you got your life lessons and you're more spiritual. And you got your life lessons from Martin Luther, right? The great reformer. He said, if your head is made of butter, stay away from the fire. Makes sense? My mom's favorite author, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, says this, in our members there is a slumbering inclination toward desire that is awakened with a sudden ferocity. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery of the flesh. The flesh burns and is in flames. In this moment, God becomes quite unreal to us. Desire envelops us in darkness and makes us utterly forget God. Therefore, the Bible teaches that in times of temptation to our flesh, there is one command: flee. Flee youthful lusts, flee worldly temptation, run. No human being has within them the strength to resist such overpowering emotions. So again, I say it's easier to avoid temptation than it is to resist it. Many today will mock this notion. We will find that in our culture, this idea of a married man or woman refusing to be alone with the opposite sex is antiquated and is something that is really laughed upon. I understand that. Like, we live in a world where men and women have to do business together. I encounter this in a denomination, in a theology where we believe women to be pastors and discipleship and all of those things. Like, I get that, right? I think it's possible for us to be able to relate to each other like equals or like colleagues and not just potential sex objects. I understand. But maybe before we tear down a wall, we should at least ask why that wall was there in the first place. I believe men and women can treat each other with respect and dignity and have legitimate friendships and still recognize that it's wise to not put ourselves in situations where we can be tempted. Don't climb the ladder. Number 3. He reduced a person to a want. Notice how the narrator introduces her not just as a beautiful woman, but as the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah. That detail matters. It matters quite a bit because it's this quiet reminder that she is somebody's daughter and she's somebody's wife. She is a whole person with a whole life. And David, in that moment, wasn't seeing any of that. He was only seeing what he wanted. It's often the first move in serious sin is stripping someone of their full humanity so it becomes easier to use them. Historians who study atrocities from slavery to genocide consistently point to this same mechanism. Ordinary people did terrible things partly because they'd first stopped seeing their victims as whole people. It's the same reduction that happens on a much smaller scale every time someone reduces another person to how useful they are, or how attractive they are, maybe how convenient, or rather than who they actually really are. Don't miss that this sin that David committed began with pornography, a version of pornography. David's gazing at her led to an objectification of her, which led to the destruction of her. Psychologists tell us that pornography trains your heart and mind to objectify the opposite sex, that it literally rewires our brain. One psychologist said that the individual who views image after image causes his or her brain to mold in such a way that eventually establishes that sexual pattern as normal, which damages their ability to bond in a committed relationship. So I would just say, men, women, regardless, if you have pornography in your life, for the sake of your relationship with your wife or your husband or your future spouse, you got to get rid of it today. I say men on this, but also we know that pornography is increasingly a problem for both sexes. Number 4, everybody with me? He abused his power. Some have raised the question of whether that meant that David raped her and that he gave her no choice in the matter. Whatever we make of Bathsheba's ability to say no to a king's summons, the power imbalance is impossible to miss. I grew up in a culture, in a time, and I'm not really sure why, whether it's purity culture or some of these things that have been and could be damaging, but I grew up in a time where it seemed like I was taught that Bathsheba was somewhat complicit in this. That maybe she shouldn't have been bathing out in the open for David to see. And they almost put a responsibility on her. And I just want to debunk that if that's what you grew up with. First of all, she was doing a ceremonial cleansing. Second of all, she had no choice in this matter other than death, arguably. Right? Nathan's confrontation in the next chapter, which we'll get to next week, he makes the point that a wealthy man who has everything, taking the one thing belonging to someone with far less power to refuse. It's the same dynamic that shows up time and time again where a boss pressures an employee or a coach pressures an athlete. Or maybe a pastor pressures someone in their church, someone who looks up to them. The relationship itself is supposed to be a form of protection. That's the whole point of having someone over you in a healthy structure. But when the person with more power uses that position to get something for themselves instead, the very thing meant to protect them becomes a mechanism of harm. David weaponized his authority against someone who had no ability to resist it. It's the exact opposite of what leadership is supposed to look like. Now, I don't have to tell you that we live in a society where we constantly are hearing stories of people who leverage their positions of power to exploit others. God's people are supposed to be different. And probably in my algorithm, I hear more about pastors and leaders who are abusing their power, not always sexually, but spiritually, emotionally in people's lives. We're supposed to be different. We're to use our power to protect and to serve, not to exploit and abuse. Part of the reason I'm a part of our denomination, Foursquare, is, first of all, the accountability that comes with that. But secondly, we as a denomination have made the decision, because there is so much prevalent in the world today, that there are people who have been hurt by those in authority, by leaders, by pastors, and they don't even know what to do with it. And so Foursquare has made the decision to have a hotline. It's a third-party hotline that you can go to Foursquare's website, and if you've been abused or hurt by a Foursquare pastor, you can report them. That's a level of accountability that most denominations, most churches, certainly non-denominational churches don't have. And I would say we are better for it. Because let's just say my motives were ill. I live with the fear that at any moment I could be reported. I'm not saying it's great to operate out of fear, but there is a fear of the Lord. That if my position of power is ever used to hurt people, I'm in trouble. Not just by my denomination, but by the Lord. Now, I want to acknowledge that there are some who have been on the other side of this. Someone objectified you and didn't take into account what their sin was going to do to you, to your family, or your future family. Someone exploited their power over you to abuse you. What this chapter shows us, in the midst of all of the craziness, what it shows us is there is a God who sees us. And this is what it says: the thing displeased him, and he will execute justice on your behalf. I hope you know that if you do find yourself on the other side of that kind of abuse, that we have pastors, female, male, who would meet with you, pray with you, walk with you, see that you could experience freedom from that. Number 5, he damaged his legacy. We're never told of the personal trauma that it caused Bathsheba. It just says that when Uriah was killed, she mourned. I think there's probably a lot to those words, because in the chapters that follow, there's this slow unraveling of David's family. It's marked by more sexual violence. It's marked by a child that dies. There's more murder. There's rebellion that takes place. Sin like this multiplies into places you didn't even know were connected. A spouse's trust, a child's safety, a community of believers now trust in their leader, completely eroded. None of it stays contained to the moment of the choice. None of it stays contained to the individual making the choice. It's an important lesson even for those whose sexual sin may not be in the same category of David's. It's pretty extreme. But we need to know that our sin affects everyone around us. Now, lots of feelings about all of this. And I just want you to know that I'm not trying to drive some of you who have committed sexual sin into despair, into shame. I just want to be clear, and we're going to talk more about this next week, but I want to be clear, there is forgiveness for sexual sin. David is not only going to be forgiven, God is going to create beauty from even these tragic ashes. Jesus will still choose to go by the name Son of David. David's Psalms are not going to be canceled and taken out of the Bible. We still use them as the basis for our worship songs. Most of Jesus' quotations in the New Testament come from the Psalms. The story doesn't end in condemnation. David is forgiven completely, fully. God doesn't discard him. But here's what I want us to hear from the message today. Forgiveness never erases the consequences, and the text is honest about that. We can be forgiven, but I'm telling you that the consequences are still real. What breaks the cycle isn't more cover-up, it's confession. And the confession needs to be sooner than later. All right, I know this has been difficult. Let's turn to one of the most important parts of this passage, that we long for a righteous king. Here's the deeper question this story is really asking. If even David, Israel's best hope, the man after God's own heart, could fail this badly, what does that say about every human leader we put our hope in? Whether it's your parents or pastors, mentors, they all eventually disappoint us in a large or small way. This story pushes us to the conclusion that we need a king that is greater than David. And strangely, that better king is foreshadowed in this chapter, not by David in this case, but by Uriah. Uriah was loyal to the end. Uriah refused personal comfort while his fellow soldiers were in danger. He was sent unknowingly to die in someone else's place for someone else's sin. And in that, he becomes this early picture of Christ, the true and better king, loyal all the way to death, who, unlike Uriah, went to the cross fully aware of the betrayal against him, and he went anyways. See, the way out of this cycle where people who have once been hurt by power, by abuse, the way out of that cycle to keep from becoming the ones who hurt others with it isn't to just white knuckle it with self-discipline. The way we overcome sin is by being captivated by the beauty of the one true King. It's a stronger affection that's replacing a weaker affection. David felt driven to possess Bathsheba because his soul was bored and it was hungry. It's when your heart is empty that you crave sinful pleasures and become willing to do whatever it takes to find them. The Puritan Thomas Chalmers called this the expulsive power of a new affection. Our problem, he said, is not that our cravings for sex are too strong, it's that our passion for God is too weak. What we need are not diminished attractions to sin. What we need are stronger affections for God. If you think about it in the context of an athlete says no to comfort and training. An athlete says no to the indulgence of certain foods and all of these things, not through raw willpower, but because a bigger desire, a desire to win and to be the best, has taken over. Think about your own life, right? And nobody has to white knuckle their way past dessert at midnight if they're already full from a better meal. In the same way, a growing affection for Christ is what quietly displaces the desire that used to run the show. This isn't a go and try harder and be better and have more discipline. No, this is a come and behold the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Allow him to consume you. Fall in love with him. This isn't about, we need to do this and you're so bad for doing that. We need more attraction, more connection to the King. This is what I want us to do. I'm going to invite you to stand. I'm going to give you some instruction. My guess is that there will be some of you who will find themselves in one of these categories. If you, I've spent the majority of all of my life, really, being in church services like this. And inevitably, when the pastor asks you to stand and there's going to be some sort of invitation or some sort of call, there's like this, something that wells up within us. I'm going up there. There's something within us, especially on a topic like this. I mean, you're out of your mind. I'm not exposing myself to this. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite our prayer team. They are going to be up front here. I've talked to a few of them. Charlie, Terry, if you guys want to come as well. I'm going to ask us to close our eyes. I'm going to read some things. And listen, there's a lot of variance in all of these things, but maybe you find yourself in one of these categories. And so the beauty of what I'm about to do isn't that all of a sudden you're going to be coming up front and people are going to be watching you and be like, I wonder what that guy did. I wonder what she did. No, this isn't that. But there is something about confession. There is something about stepping out and getting prayer. And some of you, there's just anxiousness welling up within you. And I just want to put that to rest, that if you come forward, no one's judging you, but there's freedom available to you. There's commitment available to you in the midst of this. So I'm going to ask that you close your eyes. And if you hear something that relates to you, that you would come forward and that you would receive prayer. If you're young, if you're single, if you're dating, consider committing your sexual life to God today. And by doing that, before small compromises become an entrenched pattern in your life. And if that's you, come and get prayer. Ask God to give you the strength in the midst of that. If you've committed sexual sin, you need to know that there is full forgiveness in Christ, but it begins with confession. Confess each to one another, Scripture tells us. No more hiding from this. Yes, it will be messy. Yes, it will be complicated, but there is freedom, there is hope on the other side of this. And if that's you, come and get prayer. If you've been victimized, maybe like Uriah and Bathsheba, somebody's used you and discarded you. I want you to know that there is healing in Jesus for you. But the cross not only offers forgiveness for sinners, it promises healing for sufferers too. God saw it, and it displeased him. And he will bring justice. And in the meantime, you can find healing in the love of the King, who voluntarily laid his life down for you. Maybe you need to come forward and pray through that. Maybe this is the beginning of a healing process that has been weighing on you, that has held you back and kept you in bondage and shame. This isn't ultimately a call, by the way, to behave better. It's an invitation to behold a king who had all the power in the world and used it to lay his life for us instead. Maybe you need to pray for someone else. Child, a friend, parents, maybe it's for our kids to make these decisions to honor God with their sexuality. As we go into the school year and we're releasing our kids into environments that all kinds of evil exist, that we would be parents who are continually contending and praying for God's covering and protection, and that they would make decisions to honor Him with their sexuality. So if any of those relate to you, I would invite you to come and pray.